Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was born in the Naruto world with one for all as a kekkei genkai. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The leaf was a tyrant. It was a simple, unassuming thing, freshly plucked from one of the great trees that wove themselves into the very fabric of Konohagakure. In the hands of his classmates, it was a tool, a stepping stone. In the hands of Izuku Midoriya, it was a judgment. The goal of this exercise is focus. Iruka-sensei's voice cut through the midday hum of the Ninja Academy's training yard. He stood before the class of aspiring genin, his scarred nose and firm posture the very picture of a seasoned chunin. Chakra is not just raw power. It is an extension of your spirit and your will. To master even the simplest jutsu, you must first learn to command the flow within you. The leaf concentration exercise is the foundation upon which all other control is built. Now begin. A collective murmur went through the students as they each placed a leaf on their foreheads. Izuku did the same, the soft texture a familiar, mocking presence against his skin. He closed his eyes, ignoring the inevitable snickers that had already started to ripple through the group. He reached inward, seeking the wellspring of energy that every text, every scroll, every teacher insisted was the birthright of those born in the hidden villages. For others, it was a warm, flowing river. For Izuku, it was like trying to draw water from a dry well with a thimble. He could feel something. A faint, frustrating tingle, a spark deep in his core that refused to catch fire. It was a pathetic flicker in a cavern of darkness. He focused on that flicker, nurturing it with every ounce of his considerable willpower. He pictured it as a thin, blue thread coaxing it up from his stomach, through his chest, up his neck, and to the point of contact on his forehead. The leaf trembled. Come on, come on, come on! For a heart-stopping second, he thought he had it. The leaf vibrated with a desperate energy, its edges lifting ever so slightly from his skin. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. He poured more focus, more will, more everything he had into the task. And then, as always, the thread of chakra snapped. The flicker died. The leaf, its brief flirtation with flight over, fluttered limply to the ground. A loud, barking laugh shattered his concentration. Look at him! He's sweating buckets just to make it wiggle. Seriously, Deku, why do you even bother? Izuku's eyes snapped open to see Kiba Inuzuka grinning triumphantly, a leaf stuck firmly to his own forehead. Perched on Kiba's head, the small white puppy, Akamaru, let out a supportive yip of his own. The name Deku was Kiba's invention. It was a cruel play on his name, twisting the kanji of Izuku into an alternate reading that meant one who can't do anything. It was a name that had stuck with the brutal efficiency of a well-aimed kunai. At least I'm trying, Kiba-kun, Izuku mumbled, retrieving his leaf. His face burned with a familiar, hot shame. Trying? Kiba scoffed, swaggering closer. The other students formed a loose, expectant circle. You've been trying for years. You have less chakra than Akamaru, and he's a dog. No offense, buddy, he added, scratching his partner behind the ears. Chakra capacity isn't everything, Izuku retorted, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He clutched his worn notebook, his security blanket, tighter in his hand. Control, strategy, knowledge of your opponent's jutsu. Those are just as important. Oh yeah? Let's see you strategize this. Kiba's leaf dropped from his forehead as he fell into a clumsy approximation of his clan's four legs technique stance. I'd bet I could beat you without using a single jutsu. That's enough, Kiba. Iruka's voice was sharp steel. Kiba immediately straightened up, a sheepish look on his face. Iruka's gaze softened slightly as it fell on Izuku, but it was a look filled with a weary pity that was almost worse than Kiba's scorn. Midoriya, he said, his tone gentle. Perhaps you should focus on your physical conditioning for the rest of the period. Your taijutsu forms could use work. It was a dismissal. A kind one, but a dismissal all the same. It was Iruka's way of saying, this is beyond you. Don't embarrass yourself further. Izuku's shoulders slumped. Yes, Iruka-sensei. He shuffled to the edge of the training yard, his cheeks still hot. He didn't practice his forms. Instead, he opened his notebook to a fresh page, the crisp paper a small comfort. His charcoal pencil flew across the page, not with doodles, but with sharp, analytical precision. Subject: Kiba Inuzuka Taijutsu Analysis, Preliminary, Stance for legs imitation unstable. Weight too far back. Open to a low sweep. Chakra signature, observed wild, spiky. Lacks fine control, relies on bursts of power. Likely struggles with subtle jutsu. Coordination with Niken, Akamaru excellent. Seamless. The true threat isn't Kiba alone, but the pair. Attack patterns likely involve pincer movements and sensory distraction. Weakness, overconfidence. Easily provoked. Tends to lead with his strongest attack, leaving him vulnerable if it fails. He wasn't just observing, he was dissecting. It was the one thing he could do. If he couldn't have power of his own, he would understand the power of others. He would learn their strengths, their weaknesses, their every secret. It was a strange, obsessive hobby, but it was his only connection to the world he so desperately wanted to join. A world that, with every failed exercise, seemed to push him further away. As the class ended, he packed his things, the laughter and chatter of his classmates fading as they ran off in their respective groups. He was always the last to leave. Alone, he looked up, his gaze drawn past the village rooftops to the monument carved into the cliff face overlooking Konoha. 4 faces of stone stared out with stoic permanence. Hashirama, the god of shinobi. Tobirama, the master of water. Hiruzen, the professor. And the one his eyes always found, the 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze, the yellow flash. To Izuku, Minato was the pinnacle. Not just for his legendary power, his S-rank status, or his creation of the Rasengan. It was for his sacrifice. He had faced down an unstoppable force, a tailed beast, and laid down his life to protect the village, to protect everyone. He saved them with his power, his intelligence, and ultimately, his life. He was a true hero. I don't need to be the strongest, Izuku thought, a familiar ache in his chest. I don't need to be a Hokage. I just want to be able to help. I want to save people, just once. I want to be a shinobi who, when people are scared, can stand up and make them feel safe. He clutched the strap of his backpack, a worn, canvas thing stuffed with scrolls and notebooks. A bitter smile touched his lips. A great dream for a boy who couldn't even make a leaf stick to his forehead. A chakraless dreamer in a world defined by it. The walk home was a journey through a living, breathing history book. Konoha wasn't just a village, it was a testament to strength and endurance. The air hummed with a unique energy, a blend of bustling commerce, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer on steel, and the low thrum of thousands of chakra networks coexisting. Izuku felt like a ghost moving through it, an observer to a song he couldn't hear. He passed the Yamanaka flower shop, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to his own gray mood. He saw Choji and Shikamura heading towards a barbecue restaurant, their easy camaraderie a painful reminder of his own solitude. He kept his head down, his green hair a messy mop that partially obscured his face. It was easier to study the cracks in the pavement than to meet the eyes of the villagers. They all knew who he was, the orphan boy, the academy failure, the chakraless charity case. His path deliberately took him past the memorial stone. It was a place many avoided, a stark black monolith engraved with the names of the fallen. For Izuku, it was a place of pilgrimage. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes scanning the endless list of names. These were the real shinobi. The ones who had paid the ultimate price for the peace he now walked in. Their names were a litany of sacrifice. He found Minato Namikaze's name, his fingers tracing the air as if he could feel the carved stone. He found the names of the Uchiha who had died protecting the village during the Ninetales attack, a clan now mostly confined to their own district, shrouded in whispers and suspicion. This stone was the reality of the dream. It wasn't about cool jutsu or rising through the ranks. It was about standing between the people you cared about and the darkness that threatened them. It was about being willing to have your name carved into this very stone so that someone else's wouldn't have to be. Could he do that? Without chakra, without jutsu, without anything but a big heart and a book full of notes. The question mocked him, cold and sharp as the stone itself. What could he possibly do? Throw his notebook at a missing nin? Yell analytical facts at them until they gave up? A heavy sigh escaped his lips. He turned away from the memorial and headed towards the quieter, more modest part of the village where the Konoha orphanage stood. It was a large, sturdy building, well kept but perpetually echoing with the sounds of too many children in too little space. He had lived here for as long as he could remember. His parents were a blank page in his history, civilians who had perished during the Ninetales rampage years ago. The matron, a kind but perpetually exhausted woman named Emmy, gave him a small smile as he entered. Izuku. How was the academy? It was fine, he lied, offering a watery smile of his own. The lie was a familiar ritual, a shield to protect her from his own disappointment. She had enough to worry about. He scurried up to his small room, a cramped space he shared with two younger boys who were currently outside playing. His corner was his sanctuary, a small bed, a tiny desk, and a bookshelf overflowing with scrolls and texts he'd either borrowed from the library or bought with the meager allowance the village provided for orphans. And the notebooks, they were everywhere. Stacked under his bed, crammed onto his shelf, piled on his desk. Each one was meticulously labeled. Shinobi Analysis for the Future, Volume 13. He pulled it from his bag, setting it next to the current volume he was working on, Volume 14. He opened it, flipping past the fresh entry on Kiba. His pages were a chaotic masterpiece of obsession. Detailed anatomical drawings showed the flow of chakra for a Hyuga's gentle fist. Complex diagrams attempted to break down the mechanics of Kakashi Hataki's Chidori, speculating on the necessary shape and nature transformation, and the incredible risk of tunnel vision that necessitated the Sharingan. His pride and joy was a 10-page spread on the fourth Hokage's signature techniques. Technique, Rasengan, Analysis Theory, Classification, A-Rank Ninjutsu. Components, Pure Shape Transformation. No hand seals required, indicating supreme chakra control. Stage 1, Rotation. Gathering chakra in the palm and spinning it in multiple directions at once. Hypothesis. Like trying to spin a water balloon without popping it. Requires immense focus. Stage 2, Power. Increasing the volume and output of the chakra. Hypothesis. Where the raw power of the user comes into play. A larger chakra reserve would equal a more destructive Rasengan. Stage 3, Containment. Compressing the chaotic, powerful energy into a stable sphere. The hardest part. Requires a perfect shell of chakra to hold the maelstrom within. Failure would likely result in severe damage to the user's hand/arm. Conclusion. The Rasengan is the pinnacle of chakra control, a perfect balance of power and precision. Its creation without elemental affinity makes it incredibly versatile. How did he ever conceive of it? Was he inspired by the tailed beast ball? The concentration required must be unimaginable. He spent hours like this, losing himself in the theoretical world of power he could never touch. It was a form of masochism, perhaps, but it was also his only form of training. He memorized hand seals for jutsu he could never perform. He studied elemental affinities, trying to understand the rock-paper-scissors nature of fire, wind, water, earth, and lightning. He read mission reports from the archives, analyzing Jonin-level strategies for infiltration, combat, and extraction. His mind was a razor-sharp weapon locked inside a powerless body. And every day, the dissonance between the two grew more painful. He was a master theorist of a game he couldn't even play. He was a Deku. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across his room, he packed a few empty scrolls and a fresh notebook into his bag. The public library was closing soon, but he wanted to cross-reference some information he'd read about sensory-type ninja for a new entry on the Inuzuka clan. He took a shortcut, a path he often used that wound behind the academy and past one of the lesser-used training grounds, number 7. It was usually deserted at this hour, a quiet, wooded area that let him avoid the main thoroughfares. The quiet was shattered by a sound that didn't belong. Not the sound of training, but the sharp, ugly clang of steel on steel, followed by a guttural cry of pain. Izuku froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He immediately ducked behind a thick-trunked oak tree, peering around its edge. What he saw stole the air from his lungs. In the clearing, chaos reigned. Two shinobi wearing the flak jackets of Konoha Chunin were on the ground, one motionless and the other groaning, a dark stain spreading across his uniform. Standing over them were three figures wearing mismatched gear and scratched-out headbands from the village hidden in the grass. Missing Nin? Pathetic, the apparent leader sneered. He was a tall man with a cruel scar that bisected his lip. I thought the Leaf Shinobi were supposed to be elite. This is the best patrol you have for your northern border? The Jonin teams were diverted by the decoy explosions to the east. His companion, a kunoichi with sharp, predatory eyes, reported. We have a clear path to the archives if we move now. What about the brat? The third one, a heavy-set man, grunted, gesturing with his thumb. Izuku's eyes followed his gesture, and his blood ran cold. Cowering near the edge of the clearing, trapped against a rock face, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with pigtails and a bright pink kimono, now smudged with dirt. She was clutching a small, stuffed rabbit and shaking uncontrollably, silent tears streaming down her face. She must have been playing nearby when the ambush happened. Leave her, the leader commanded. She's not a threat. Another mouth to feed is a waste of resources. The heavy-set man chuckled, a horrible, wet sound. Or she could be useful for a ransom. Or maybe just for a bit of fun. It's been a boring trip. He took a menacing step towards her. The girl let out a small, terrified whimper, pressing herself harder against the cold stone. Everything in Izuku screamed at him. Run. Hide. Get a real shinobi. You can't do anything. You're Deku. His body was frozen, his limbs locked by a primal fear. He was unquantifiably outmatched. They were shinobi who had defeated two Chunin. He was a boy who couldn't make a leaf stick. Any rational thought, every piece of analysis he had ever compiled, told him that to intervene was suicide. He would die, and it wouldn't even slow them down. But then he saw the little girl's eyes. He had seen that look before. He saw it in the mirror every morning. It was the look of absolute, hopeless despair. The look of someone who knew they were powerless, who knew that no help was coming. And then he saw the villain's face. The casual cruelty, the smug curl of his lip as he advanced on a terrified child. It was the same look Kiba gave him, magnified 1,000 times into something truly evil. The strong preying on the weak simply because they could. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't a strategy. It was a raw, primal instinct, a muscle he never knew he had, flexing for the very first time. His brain shut off, and his legs, the same legs that had been frozen in terror moments before, moved. He burst from behind the tree, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Leave her alone! The three missing Nin turned, their expressions shifting from surprise to incredulous amusement. They saw a scrawny, green-haired boy in an academy uniform, with no weapon drawn, no chakra flaring, nothing but wild, terrified eyes. What's this? The kunoichi laughed. A lost little leaf wants to play hero? The heavy-set man who had been advancing on the girl stopped and turned, a nasty grin spreading across his face. You've got a lot of nerve, kid. Or you're just an idiot. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom of panic. What am I doing? What am I doing? He had no jutsu, no weapon, no chance. He was just standing here, a target. He needed to create a distraction. A diversion. Something, anything, to buy the girl a second to run. His eyes darted around, and he saw his bag. His heavy, book-filled backpack. It wasn't a plan. It was desperation. With a yell that was more fear than fury, he swung the heavy bag off his shoulder and hurled it with all his might at the heavy-set ninja. It was a clumsy, pathetic attack. The bag flew in a wobbly arc, not with the speed of a weapon, but with the dead weight of thrown luggage. But it was unexpected. The ninja, anticipating a kunai or a paper bomb, was caught off guard by the sheer absurdity of it. He raised an arm to block it, and the bag, filled with the dense weight of Izuku's notebooks, slammed into him with a solid thump. It didn't hurt him, not really. But it staggered him. It broke his focus. And it sent his precious notebooks, his life's work, spilling across the dusty ground. Shinobi Analysis for the Future, Volume 14 landed face up, its pages fluttering in the breeze. Run! Izuku screamed at the little girl, his voice cracking. For a moment, the girl was too stunned to move. But his desperate cry seemed to break the spell. She scrambled to her feet and darted into the woods, her stuffed rabbit still clutched in one hand. The heavy-set ninja snarled, shoving the bag aside. "You annoying little gnat! I'm going to pull your arms off," he lunged. Izuku saw a fist the size of a melon flying towards his face and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was about to die. He had bought the girl a few seconds, and this was the price. He squeezed his eyes shut, a single, hot tear of terror and regret escaping. "I'm sorry." The blow never landed. There was a sound. A sound that wasn't thunder, but felt like it. A deep, resonant whom that seemed to compress the very air. A gust of wind, impossibly strong, tore through the clearing, kicking up a storm of dust and leaves. Izuku was thrown backward, tumbling head over heels before landing hard on the ground. He coughed, his ears ringing, and pushed himself up, blinking the dust from his eyes. Where the heavy-set ninja had been, there was now a crater. Not a large one, but a distinct depression in the earth, as if something of immense weight and speed had struck it. The ninja himself was gone, or rather, he was a crumpled heap 20 yards away, embedded in the trunk of a tree. He wasn't moving. The other two missing nin were frozen, their faces masks of pure shock and terror. They were staring at a new figure who stood between them and Izuku. He was a man, but he looked like a skeleton. Impossibly tall and gaunt, his clothes hung off a frame that seemed to have no muscle or fat on it. His face was all sharp angles and deep-set shadows, his blonde hair hanging in two thin, distinct bangs that framed his skeletal features. He looked ancient and fragile, as if a strong breeze could knock him over. A trickle of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth into the dirt. Now, the man said, his voice a low, tired rumble, yet it carried an authority that defied his frail appearance. "Picking on children? That's not very sporting, is it?" The ninja leader, recovering his wits, snarled. "Who the hell are you?" He and the kunoichi blurred into motion, flashing through hand seals. Fire style, fireball jutsu. Wind style, great breakthrough. A jet of fire and a gale of wind erupted from their mouths, combining into a swirling vortex of superheated flame that roared towards the skeletal man. It was a powerful, B-rank combination jutsu, more than enough to incinerate a normal person. The man didn't move. He didn't make a hand seal. He didn't even seem to brace himself. He simply raised one bony hand and punched. He punched the air. The resulting shockwave was biblical. The world seemed to turn to sound and fury. The flaming vortex didn't just dissipate. It was annihilated, blown back and extinguished in an instant. The force of the punch continued, a visible distortion in the air, a hammer blow of pure kinetic energy. It slammed into the two missing nin, and they were simply gone, launched into the sky like stones from a catapult, their screams swallowed by the wind. Silence fell upon the clearing, thick and heavy. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and Izuku's own ragged, disbelieving breaths. He stared at the gaunt man, who now seemed to sway on his feet. The man turned his head, and his sunken eyes, a brilliant, piercing blue, locked onto Izuku. The intensity in that gaze was terrifying, more intimidating than the missing nin had been. This wasn't the power of jutsu. This was something else. Something primal. The man took a step towards him, and then another. He looked down at the notebooks scattered on the ground, his eyes lingering on the open page of shinobi analysis for the future. A strange, unreadable expression crossed his face. "You," the man said, his voice raspy. He took another step, then suddenly coughed, a racking, painful sound. He hunched over, and when he straightened up, a shocking amount of blood spewed from his lips, staining the front of his simple shirt. His entire body seemed to shrink, to deflate, becoming even more skeletal and fragile. "Are you all right?" Izuku stammered, his fear momentarily replaced by a surge of concern. It was a stupid question. The man was clearly not all right. The stranger wiped his mouth with the back of a trembling hand, looking at the blood with a grimace of weary resignation. He ignored the question, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Izuku, studying him with an unnerving intensity. "You have no chakra," the man stated. It wasn't a question. "I can't sense a drop. You're weaker than any civilian I've ever met. You knew you stood no chance against them. You knew it was suicide." Izuku flinched, the words striking him with the force of a physical blow. He looked down, unable to meet the man's gaze. I know. Then why? The man pressed, his voice soft but insistent. Why did you move? Why did you face them? Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The shame, the fear, the adrenaline, it all swirled inside him, and the answer tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, the core truth of his entire existence. Because her face, she looked like she'd given up, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. And my legs, they just started moving. I don't know why. There were a dozen things I could have done, 100 things a real shinobi would have done. Get help, create a better diversion, something, anything else. But I just acted. He finally looked up, meeting the man's gaze, his own green eyes blazing with a desperate fire. I couldn't just stand there and watch someone die. The skeletal man stared at him, his sunken eyes wide. For a long moment, he was silent, the only sound being the wind whispering through the trees he had nearly torn from their roots. The hard, analytical edge to his expression softened, replaced by something Izuku couldn't identify. It was a flicker of ancient sadness, a glimmer of profound surprise, and underneath it all, a spark of something that looked almost like hope. He saw the fear still trembling in Izuku's limbs. He saw the absolute, quantifiable lack of power. He saw the foolish, reckless, suicidal charge. But he also saw the thrown backpack. He saw the desperate, selfless cry. He saw a soul that refused to stand by while someone was in peril, regardless of the cost. He saw the spirit of a true hero, burning brightly in the most unlikely of vessels. The man, a legend hiding within a dying shell, a man who had been searching for decades, felt a monumental weight begin to shift within his own soul. His name was Tashinori, though few remembered it. And in that moment, looking at the trembling, chakraless boy covered in dirt, he spoke the words that would shatter Izuku Midoriya's world forever. I have been looking for you, Tashinori rasped, a faint, weary smile touching his bloody lips. Boy, what is your name? The silence that followed the storm was a living thing. It pressed in on Izuku, heavier than any physical weight, muffling the frantic pounding of his own heart. The air tasted of ozone and churned earth, a stark, electric tang that clung to the back of his throat. Dust motes, illuminated by the sliver of a rising moon, danced in the air where two shinobi had ceased to exist moments before. One crumpled, broken form was still visible, grotesquely wedged into the trunk of a distant tree. The other two were simply gone. Boy, what is your name? The question, rasped from the skeletal figure before him, finally broke the spell. Izuku flinched, his gaze snapping from the devastation back to the man. The stranger was swaying, his impossibly tall and gaunt frame looking as though it were being held up by sheer willpower alone. His sunken blue eyes, however, burned with an intensity that was utterly at odds with his fragile state. Midoriya. Izuku stammered, the name a weak puff of air. Izuku Midoriya, Izuku Midoriya. The man repeated, the name tasting foreign and significant on his tongue. A grim smile, more a grimace of pain, touched his lips. He took a staggering step forward and stumbled, catching himself on the very tree Izuku had hidden behind. The bark groaned under his hand. A good name. A strong name. He coughed again, a deep, rattling sound that shook his entire body. Fresh blood, dark in the moonlight, welled at the corner of his mouth. Concern, sharp and instinctive, pierced through Izuku's thick haze of terror. You're hurt! Izuku blurted out, taking a half-step forward before his own fear rooted him to the spot. We need to get you to the Konoha hospital. The medical team there, they can— No! The man cut him off, his voice firm despite its weakness. There is no medicine for this, boy. This is an old wound. One I have just finished tearing open for good. He pushed himself upright, his movements slow and deliberate. My time is measured in minutes now. What I have to say to you is more important than any healing jutsu. He gestured with a long, bony finger to a fallen log on the edge of the clearing. Sit. We must talk. Numbly Izuku obeyed. He felt like a puppet whose strings had been cut, his limbs moving with a strange, disconnected feeling. He sat on the rough bark of the log, his hands placed on his knees to stop them from shaking. His gaze fell upon his scattered notebooks, their pages filled with his own childish scrawl, now covered in dirt and trampled underfoot. The sight sent a fresh pang of misery through him. His whole world, right there in the dust. The gaunt man, who Izuku was beginning to realize must be a shinobi of legendary, unheard of power, lowered himself carefully to sit opposite him. The moonlight cast deep shadows across his face, making his skull-like features even more pronounced. He looked like a Shinigami, a death god from old tales, come to pass judgment. "My name," the man began, his voice a low rumble, "is Tashinori. And what you witnessed tonight, Izuku Midoriya, was the last gasp of a power that is not my own. Not by birth, at least." Izuku stared, confused. "The last gasp? But you punched the air and you..." He couldn't even finish the sentence. The physics of it made no sense. It wasn't a jutsu he had ever read about. No hand seals, no elemental nature. It was just pure force. Tashinori followed his gaze to the destruction. "Yes. That was the power. I call it one for all. He said the name with a reverence that was almost religious. "And it is a most unique kind of kekkei genkai." Izuku's analytical mind, his one and only weapon, kicked into gear despite his fear. "A kekkei genkai? Like the Sharingan or the Byakugan? Or a clan's hidden jutsu, like the Abduraim's insects?" He shook his head, the pieces not fitting. "But those are passed down through blood. They're genetic. You said it wasn't yours by birth." A genuine, warm smile briefly lit up Tashinori's gaunt face, making him look fractionally less like a wraith. "Sharp. You see the contradiction immediately. You are correct. One for all is not a bloodline trait in the traditional sense. It is a kekkei toda, a bloodline selection, but one of a kind. It cannot be inherited. It cannot be stolen." He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto Izuku's. "It can only be given. Willingly." The air grew still. Izuku felt a strange tingling sensation crawl up his spine, a premonition that the world was tilting on its axis. "Given?" he whispered. "Think of it as a sacred torch," Tashinori explained, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "A flame passed from one hand to the next, growing brighter with each new bearer. The core of this power is simple, it stockpiles power. My own physical strength, my own chakra, was poured into it. And before me, my master poured her strength into it. And her master before her. For 8 generations, this power has been cultivated, nurtured, and passed down, growing stronger each time." He held up a skeletal hand, clenching it into a fist. Even in his weakened state, Izuku could almost feel the phantom pressure of the power that had resided there moments before. 8 generations. Izuku breathed, his mind reeling. The implications were staggering. A power that compounded over time? A shinobi with the stockpiled strength of 8 predecessors? That wasn't just S-rank. That was something else entirely. That was the kind of power that could level mountains, change the course of wars. The kind of power that belonged to legends like the first Hokage. "But why?" Izuku asked, the question bubbling up from his core. "Why create such a thing? A power like that, it's too much for one person. What was its purpose?" Tashinori's expression darkened. The faint warmth vanished, replaced by a deep, ancient sorrow. "All light is born to fight the darkness, boy. This power was created for one reason, to stand against the great evil. An opposite. A foil." He paused, gathering his strength. "In the time of the First Shinobi World War, a time of chaos and unending conflict, there was a man. His name is lost to most of history, known only by the moniker his terrified followers gave him, Sensei. This man possessed a terrifying ability, a cursed kekkei genkai that allowed him to steal the jutsu and bloodline traits of others, making them his own. He could hoard power, accumulating abilities like a twisted collector." Izuku felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. A power to steal other powers. It was the stuff of nightmares. "This man, Sensei, had a younger brother," Tashinori continued, his voice barely a whisper. "The brother was frail, but he possessed a seemingly useless kekkei genkai, the ability to pass his power on to another. On its own, it was nothing, but Sensei, in his arrogance and perhaps a twisted form of affection, forced a powerful, energy stockpiling ability onto his weaker brother, thinking it would make him strong. He didn't realize that the two abilities would merge. The power to stockpile and the power to be transferred, they became one. They became the seed of one for all. Toshinori looked Izuku in the eye, the weight of history in his gaze. The brother, horrified by what Sensei had become, dedicated his life and his new, combined power to stopping him. He was the first. He failed, but before he fell, he passed the torch. And so the cycle began. A secret war, fought in the shadows for nearly a century. A power that can be given, nurtured by generations of selfless souls, against a power that can only take, wielded by a monster of pure ego. Izuku's head was spinning. This was history that wasn't in any textbook. A secret war that shaped the world he knew. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and in a strange way, it made a horrible kind of sense. The world was full of light and shadow. Of Minato Namikaze, who gave his life for the village, and men like Orochimaru, who sacrificed others for his own ambition. You fought him? Izuku asked, his voice trembling. The successor to this. Sensei? Toshinori nodded grimly. He unconsciously touched his side, where his shirt was bunched up. 5 years ago. It was the battle that ruined this body. I won. I shattered his life support systems and sent him into hiding, a ghost of his former self. But the cost. He let out a rattling sigh. The cost was everything. My stomach was destroyed. My respiratory system was shredded. I can only use my power for a few moments at a time now. My flame is all but extinguished. I am the 8th user, and I am a failure. A failure? Izuku exclaimed, shocked. But you saved me! You beat those ninja like they were nothing! I am a failure because I could not end the threat for good. Toshinori corrected, his voice laced with self-loathing. And I have failed to find a worthy successor. For years I have searched. I have looked at Jonin, at Umbu, at the most promising genin. I found strength, I found talent, I found ambition, but I did not find the spirit. The core requirement of a wielder of one for all. He leaned in again, his presence filling the small space between them. This power chooses its master not by their strength, but by their heart. To wield it is to carry the will of all who came before. It requires a soul that is willing to sacrifice everything for others. A soul that runs towards danger not for glory, but because someone needs help. Toshinori's piercing blue eyes softened. Tonight I saw that spirit. I saw a boy with no power, no hope of victory, run towards certain death to save a little girl he didn't even know. I saw you, Izuku Midoriya. Your body may be weak, but your spirit is that of a true hero. The world stopped. The wind died. The crickets fell silent. Izuku heard a roaring in his ears as Toshinori's next words landed, each one a meteor strike on the barren landscape of his life. The 9th wielder of one for all. I choose you. Tears. Hot and immediate. They sprang from Izuku's eyes without permission, blurring the skeletal face of the man before him. It was too much. The dream he had nurtured in the deepest, most secret corners of his heart, the one he never dared to speak aloud for fear of having it crushed, was being offered to him. It was a joke. It had to be a cruel, elaborate genjutsu. No! Izuku choked out, shaking his head violently. The tears were flowing freely now, carving clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. No, you can't, you're wrong. You've made a mistake. He scrambled backward off the log, landing on the dusty ground. He pointed a trembling finger at himself. Look at me! I'm a Deku! That's what they call me at the academy. The useless one. I can't even do the most basic chakra control exercise. I trip over my own feet. My notebooks are the only thing I'm good for, and they're just notes. I can't be who you're looking for. I'm nothing. The dam of years of frustration, of whispered insults, of pitying looks, of self-hatred, finally broke. He sobbed ugly, gasping sobs that racked his small frame. He was laying his soul bare for this stranger, showing him all the broken, worthless pieces. Toshinori did not move. He simply watched, his expression patient and understanding. When Izuku's sobs finally quieted into ragged, hitched breaths, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. I did not say you were perfect, boy. I did not say you were ready. I said you were worthy. He rose to his feet and walked over to Izuku, kneeling down so they were eye to eye. The scent of blood and dusty earth was strong. All the best shinobi, all the true heroes, they all had one thing in common, Tashinori said softly. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. You didn't run in because you had a plan, you ran in because a child was in danger. That is not nothing. That, Izuku Midoriya, is everything. He held out his hand. The choice is yours. You can remain as you are, and no one will blame you. Or you can accept this power, this burden, this legacy. It will be a path of pain and hardship. It will demand more from you than you can possibly imagine. But it will give you the chance to become what you've always dreamed of being. Izuku stared at the offered hand, then at Tashinori's face. In the deep shadows of his eyes he saw no pity. He saw respect. He saw belief. It was a look no one had ever given him before. He thought of the memorial stone. He thought of the fourth Hokage. He thought of the little girl's terrified face. And he thought of a lifetime of being told he was worthless. With a trembling hand he wiped the tears from his eyes. His voice was hoarse, but for the first time in his life, it was steady. I accept. A profound sense of relief washed over Tashinori's face, a weight lifting from his shoulders that he had carried for years. Good. Then we haven't a moment to waste. He stood up, pulling a single, long strand of his blonde hair from his head. He held it out to Izuku. The ritual of transfer requires two things, he explained. First, the recipient must willingly ingest some of the current wielder's DNA. This creates the physical link, the conduit for the power to pass through. Izuku stared at the single strand of hair resting in Tashinori's palm. His mind, which had just processed the secret history of the shinobi world and accepted a mythical power, came to a screeching halt at this one bizarre detail. I have to eat this. Tashinori's gaunt face actually managed a brief, barking laugh. Yes, boy. A bit anticlimactic, I know. But it is the way. Now eat. Hesitantly, reverently Izuku took the strand of hair. It felt like a normal hair. He looked at Tashinori, who gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, he put the hair in his mouth and, with a grimace, swallowed. It went down with a small scratch, a profoundly weird and underwhelming first step on his path to becoming a hero. And now, for the second part, Tashinori said, his voice becoming serious once more. The transfer of will. He placed his large, bony hand flat against Izuku's chest, directly over his heart. Izuku's breath hitched. The hand was cold, like a stone. Brace yourself, boy. This will feel strange. Tashinori closed his eyes. His face, already a mask of exhaustion, seemed to cave in on itself. He was gathering the very last dregs of his power, the final embers of the great fire that had once raged within him. From the first to the eighth, he whispered, his voice resonating with an unseen power. We give our fire to the ninth. Take our hope. Take our will. Take our power. One for all. It started as a spark. Deep within Tashinori's palm, a light began to glow, a soft, golden-white luminescence that shone through his skin. The light pulsed, and with it came a warmth that spread through Izuku's chest, chasing away the night's chill. Then the spark became a flood. It was not a gentle river. It was a tsunami. A torrent of pure, unadulterated energy surged from Tashinori's hand into Izuku's body. It felt like being struck by lightning and dunked in lava at the same time. Every nerve ending screamed. His chakra pathways, dormant and threadbare his whole life, were force-fed a universe of power. They stretched, they groaned, they threatened to tear apart under the sheer, overwhelming volume. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of light and sensation. Izuku felt a great, roaring wind, the phantom sensation of floating in a deep ocean, the unyielding strength of a mountain, the quick, darting flight of a bird. These were not his feelings. They were echoes, memories embedded in the chakra itself. And he heard whispers, faint, ethereal voices that swirled at the edge of his consciousness. Must stop him. Keep it safe, Nana. Such a kind boy. The weight is heavy. Stand tall. Go beyond. He saw shadows, 8 indistinct figures standing in a vast, dark space within his own mind. They were featureless, silhouettes of power and will, and they all turned to look at him. He felt their collective gaze, a silent acknowledgement. An acceptance. He was one of them now. The torrent slowed to a trickle, and then it stopped. The light faded. Toshinori slumped forward, his hand falling from Izuku's chest. He would have collapsed completely if Izuku hadn't instinctively caught him. The man was terrifyingly light, like holding a bundle of dry sticks. "It is done," Toshinori wheezed, his head lolling against Izuku's shoulder. His skin was paler than ever, his breathing shallow and rapid. The last of his strength was gone. He had poured it all into Izuku. "The flame is yours now, ninth." Izuku felt different. He felt full. The empty well inside him was now an ocean, a raging, chaotic sea of energy that he had no idea how to control. It was terrifying and exhilarating. He could feel it thrumming under his skin, a caged beast waiting to be unleashed. "Thank you," Izuku whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Toshinori-sensei, thank you." A weak smile touched the dying man's lips. "Don't thank me yet, boy. A word of warning. Your body, it's an unprepared vessel. An eggshell trying to hold a mountain. If you try to use the power now, at 100%, you will blow yourself apart. You must train, build your body, learn control." His words were cut short by a new sound. The snap of a twig from the edge of the woods. Both Izuku and the fading Toshinori looked up. Stepping out from behind a tree was a figure Izuku vaguely recognized from the initial attack. He was another grass nin, but he hadn't been with the main trio. He must have been a lookout or a rear guard. He was a chunin, judging by his flak jacket, and his face was a mixture of greed, fear, and opportunity. He had clearly hidden and watched the entire exchange. He stared at the crumpled form of Toshinori, then at Izuku, and a predator's grin split his face. Well, the chunin sneered, drawing a kunai. "What have we here? The mighty monster who took out my comrades is nothing but a dying old man. And he passed his power to a snot-nosed brat." He took a menacing step forward. "I don't know what kind of jutsu that was, old man, but it ends here. And once I'm done with you, I'll take my time figuring out how to carve that power out of the kid." What a prize! Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Izuku. But it was immediately followed by something else. Something hot and ferocious. Rage. This man was threatening to defile the legacy he had just been given. He was threatening the man who had believed in him, who had given him everything. He was going to harm his teacher. "My teacher. Get away from him!" Izuku growled, his voice a low snarl he didn't recognize as his own. He gently laid Toshinori against the log and stood up, placing himself between the chunin and his mentor. The chunin laughed. "Or what? You'll throw another backpack at me?" He blurred forward, far faster than the heavy-set ninja from before. His kunai was aimed straight for Izuku's throat. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the glint of steel, the cruel smirk, the killing intent. He remembered Toshinori's warning. "You will blow yourself apart." He didn't care. All the power raging inside him, the ocean of 8 generations of strength, needed an outlet. He didn't think about control. He didn't think about percentages. He thought about Toshinori's tired, kind face. He thought about protecting his hero. He drew his right arm back, and the power answered his call. It wasn't a gentle flow. It was a cataclysm. Green, bioluminescent lightning, a color of pure, untamed energy, erupted from his body, crackling and snapping around his arm. The sleeve of his academy jacket was instantly shredded, disintegrated by the sheer pressure. The muscles in his arm bulged, swelling to nearly twice their normal size, veins standing out like thick ropes. The pain was immediate and blinding, a chorus of tearing muscle and cracking bone, but it was distant, drowned out by the roar of the power in his ears. He focused it all into his fist. All the hope. All the rage. All the power of one for all. The chunin's eyes went wide with terror. He saw not a boy, but a conduit for a god's wrath. He tried to pull back, but it was too late. Izuku swung. He didn't yell a jutsu name. He yelled a declaration. A promise. A tribute to the village that was his home, and the man who had given him a future. Konoha! Smash! His fist didn't even connect. The air pressure alone did the work. The world exploded in a concussive blast of force. A shockwave, far more focused and violent than Tashinori's, ripped through the clearing. The ground in front of Izuku buckled and tore apart, a trench gouged into the earth as if by a giant, invisible claw. The Chunin was hit by the full brunt of this invisible fist. He didn't fly. He was simply obliterated, his body disintegrating into a red mist that was instantly scattered by the gale force winds. The shockwave continued, felling a dozen trees behind where the Chunin had stood, snapping their thick trunks like twigs, and then silence. Izuku stood panting in the center of the fresh devastation, his arms still extended. The green lightning sputtered and died. And then, the pain crashed over him. It was a symphony of agony. He looked down at his right arm. It was a ruin. Twisted at an unnatural angle, swollen, and colored a sickening, mottled purple. The bones were not just broken, they were shattered, pulverized into dust and splinters within his flesh. His chakra coils, the pathways that had just been so violently overinflated, felt shredded and burned out. The backlash was absolute. A strangled cry escaped his lips, and he staggered back, clutching the mangled limb to his chest. This sheer, excruciating pain made him want to vomit. The world swam, graying out at the edges. Through the haze of his agony he saw movement. Figures dropped from the trees, silent and swift. They wore white, animal-faced porcelain masks, and the standard gray flak jackets of Konoha's elite. Umbu Black Ops. They fanned out, their movements economical and precise. Their masked faces betrayed no emotion, but Izuku could feel their collective shock. They took in the scene, the massive, fresh destruction. The dead, half-demolished body of a Chunin in the distance. The unrecognizable red mist. The dying, skeletal form of an unknown man who radiated an aura of past glory. And at the center of it all, a small, crying boy in a tattered academy uniform, cradling an arm that looked like it had been put through a meat grinder. A boy who, their senses told them, had a chakra signature so faint it was practically non-existent. The scene made no sense. It was a paradox. A riddle written in blood and broken earth. The Umbu with a cat mask knelt, checking on Tashinori. His body language was tense. He knew he was in the presence of something far beyond a simple border skirmish. Another, with a weasel mask, took a cautious step towards Izuku. "Kid!" The Umbu's voice was distorted by the mask, calm and professional. "What happened here?" Izuku couldn't answer. His vision was tunneling. The pain was a roaring black tide, pulling him under. He looked past the Umbu, at Tashinori, who was watching him with a pained, proud, and terrified look in his fading eyes. I did it, sensei," he thought, his mind beginning to fray. "I protected you." His knees buckled. The world tilted sideways, the masked faces of the Umbu blurring into white smudges against the dark trees. The last thing he felt before the blackness took him completely was the ghost of that inherited flame, now nestled deep within his soul, a sleeping giant in a broken vessel. He had the power. Now, he just had to survive it. The first thing to return was the smell. It was a sharp, sterile scent, a combination of strong antiseptic cleaner and medicinal herbs that was the unmistakable perfume of the Konoha hospital. It was a smell Izuku knew well from his frequent, if minor, childhood injuries at the orphanage. This time, however, it felt different. It felt like an anchor, pulling him up from a deep, dark, and blessedly painless abyss. The second thing to return was the pain. It wasn't the blinding, shrieking agony of the moment his arm had given way. This was a dull, profound throb, a deep, resonant ache that seemed to emanate from the very marrow of his bones. It was the pain of aftermath, the body's grim accounting of the damage done. He groaned, a dry, rasping sound, and his eyelids fluttered open. The ceiling was white. A plain, unremarkable, and blessedly solid white. He was lying on his back in a bed with thin, starchy sheets. To his left, a stand held in forebag, a clear fluid dripping slowly down a tube and into his undamaged left arm. He turned his head to the right and saw it. His arm. It was encased in a complex structure of plaster, bandages, and what looked like wooden splints. But that wasn't all. Affixed to the cast were several small, rectangular paper talismans, each covered in intricate, ink-drawn seals that glowed with a faint, calming blue light. A continuous, low-level healing jutsu, designed to knit shattered bone and mend torn tissue over a long period. He was lucky. This kind of long-term treatment was expensive, usually reserved for high-ranking shinobi. He tried to wiggle his fingers. Nothing happened. He couldn't even feel them. The entire limb was a dead weight, a foreign object attached to his shoulder. The memory of the event crashed back into him with the force of his own catastrophic punch. Tashinori's dying form. The sneering Chunin, the roar of power, the green lightning, the feeling of his bones turning to dust. It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. A soft cough drew his attention. A medical nin, a woman with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun, stood at the foot of his bed, reviewing a chart on a clipboard. She noticed he was awake and gave him a gentle, professional smile. "Welcome back, Midoriya-kun," she said, her voice calm and soothing. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. You gave us quite a scare." 2 days? Izuku croaked, his throat dry. She nodded, setting the chart down. "The damage to your right arm was extensive. The most severe case of non-combat related trauma I've ever seen in someone so young. It's a miracle we were able to save the limb at all. The bones were practically dust. We had to graft several sections from a donor bank. You'll be in this cast for at least 2 months, and the physical therapy after will be rigorous. 2 months. The Academy's final graduation exam was in 3 weeks. The reality of it hit him. He had the power now, this incredible, world-altering gift, and he had immediately rendered himself incapable of even holding a kunai. The irony was so bitter it tasted like ash. "The other man?" Izuku asked, his voice a strained whisper. "The tall, blonde man. Tashinori-san. Is he?" The medical nin's expression became carefully neutral. "There was no one else brought in from that training ground, Midoriya-kun. The Umbu report listed 3 hostile casualties and yourself. You were the only survivor found at the scene, vanished." Tashinori had simply vanished. Was he alive? Or had he used the last of his energy and faded away into nothing? The uncertainty was a cold stone in Izuku's stomach. He had been given this monumental legacy, and his master, the only person in the world who understood it, was gone. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone with the sleeping giant inside him. The door to his room slid open with a soft hiss, and the medical nin immediately straightened, her posture shifting from professional calm to rigid deference. "Hokage-sama!" Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. Standing in the doorway, framed by the light of the hallway, was the diminutive figure of the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi. He wore his official white and red robes, his face a mask of grandfatherly wrinkles and profound wisdom. The faint aroma of pipe smoke trailed him like a ghost. This was the god of shinobi, the professor, the leader of the entire village. And he was here. In his room. "Thank you for your work, Hana," Hiruzen said to the medical nin, his voice old but clear as a bell. "Could you give the boy and me a moment alone?" "Of course, Hokage-sama." She bowed deeply and scurried out of the room, sliding the door shut behind her. The silence that filled the room was heavier than a mountain. Hiruzen pulled a small stool over to Izuku's bedside and sat down, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't speak for a long time, simply observing Izuku with his sharp, intelligent eyes. Izuku felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. He could feel the weight of the Hokage's gaze, a pressure that had nothing to do with chakra and everything to do with decades of experience and unimaginable power. Finally, Hiruzen took his pipe from his robes, though he didn't light it. He simply held it, turning it over in his old, weathered hands. "The Umbu report on the incident at Training Ground 7 makes for some fascinating reading, Midoriya-kun," the Hokage began, his tone casual, conversational. "It speaks of 3 missing nin from Kusugakure, B-rank threats, all neutralized. It speaks of destruction on a scale that would suggest a high-level A-rank jutsu, and at the center of it all, it speaks of a young academy student with negligible chakra reserves found with a pulverized arm." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It's quite the paradox, wouldn't you agree?" Izuku swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly bone-dry. Tashinori's warning echoed in his mind. A secret war fought in the shadows, a power that can only take He couldn't tell him. He couldn't tell anyone. This secret was not his to share. It was the burden of 8 generations, and now it was his. I don't know what happened, sir. Izuku lied, his voice barely audible. He hated the words as they came out, but he forced them. It's all a blur, the ninja attacked. I tried to help someone, and then there was a bright light. The next thing I remember is waking up here. It was a weak lie, pathetic and transparent, and he knew it. Hiruzen's eyes, which had seemed kindly, sharpened with an intensity that made Izuku flinch. A bright light? The report from the sensory division is more specific. They detected a chakra spike from your location, Izuku. A spike so massive, so dense, that it momentarily blinded every sensory type on duty. It was a signature unlike anything ever recorded in Konoha's archives. It was not a flare of emotion. It was controlled, directed. It was a weapon. The Hokage leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. That kind of power doesn't just appear from a bright light. It comes from somewhere. A forbidden jutsu? A cursed seal? A contract with something we don't know about. He held Izuku's gaze. I am not your enemy, boy, but a power of that magnitude appearing suddenly within our walls, in the hands of an untrained child, that is a threat to this village until it is understood. So, I will ask you again. Where did it come from? Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. The pressure was immense. This was the Hokage. Lying to him felt like treason, but betraying Tashinori's trust, the trust of 8 generations of heroes, felt even worse. He squeezed his eyes shut, picturing Tashinori's gaunt, smiling face. I can do this. I have to. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama, Izuku said, his voice trembling but firm. He opened his eyes, trying to inject as much sincerity as he could into his gaze. I swear on the will of fire, I don't know. Maybe it was some kind of hysterical strength. A one-time thing? My body just reacted. Hiruzen Sarutobi stared at him for a long, silent moment. He saw the boy's fear, the trembling lip, the sweat on his brow. He saw the terrible, clumsy lie. But he also saw something else deep within the boy's green eyes. Not malice. Not deception for personal gain. It was resolve. A fierce, protective determination. The boy wasn't lying to protect himself. He was lying to protect the secret. The third Hokage was a man who had seen everything. He had seen the birth of legends and the fall of gods. He had looked into the eyes of liars, traitors, heroes, and monsters. He knew, with an old warrior's certainty, that pushing further would only make the boy retreat. The truth would not be forced. It would have to be earned. He leaned back with a heavy sigh, the tension in the room dissipating. A one-time thing, he repeated, his voice weary. For the village's sake, I hope you are right. But hope is not a strategy. He stood up, placing his pipe back in his robes. You will be under observation, Midoriya-kun. Your recovery, your training, your progress at the academy, it will all be monitored. Do you understand? Yes, Hokage-sama, Izuku whispered, relief and dread warring within him. Good. Hiruzen walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. He looked back at Izuku, his expression unreadable. The Umbu also found traces of another's presence at the scene, a tall man, judging by the footprints. His chakra signature was faint, like a dying fire, but it was immense. Powerful. And then, it was gone. If you happen to remember anything about this mysterious benefactor, I expect you to report it immediately. With that final, pointed statement, he was gone, leaving Izuku alone with his throbbing arm and the crushing weight of his new reality. The next 2 months were a unique form of hell. The world moved on, but Izuku was trapped in a prison of plaster and pain. His classmates from the academy visited once, a stilted, awkward affair led by Iruka-sensei. Kiba made a few snide remarks about him being too weak to even train properly. Sakura and Ino offered polite but distant well-wishes, and Hinata shyly placed a small pot of flowers by his bed before hiding behind Shino. They saw him as the same old Deku. Only now he was broken too. He was discharged from the hospital after a week, his arms still in the heavy, seal-covered cast. The graduation exams were a week away. His dream was slipping through his fingers. He sat in his small room at the orphanage, staring at his useless arm. He could still feel it. Not the pain, but the memory of the power. The intoxicating, terrifying rush of one for all. It was a universe of strength, and he was the door. But every time he opened that door, the frame shattered. Your body, it's an unprepared vessel. An eggshell trying to hold a mountain, Toshinori's words echoed in his mind. He was right. One punch, one act of heroism, had cost him his arm and nearly his dream. He couldn't be a shinobi like this. A one-shot cannon was useless on a real mission. He would be a liability, a danger to any team he was assigned to. He looked at his bookshelf, at his prized collection of notebooks. Shinobi Analysis for the Future, Volume 11. He pulled it down, his left hand clumsy as he flipped through the pages. He stopped on a detailed entry, one he had spent weeks on. Subject: Maikai Taijutsu Analysis. Classification: Konoha Sublime Green Beast of Prey. Jonin. Fighting Style: Goken, Strong Fist. Overwhelming physical power and speed. No observed ninjutsu or genjutsu usage. Physicality: Conditioning is beyond S rank. Musculature, bone density, and stamina must be trained to a superhuman degree to withstand the strain of his own techniques, even before considering the 8 gates. Core principle: the body itself is the ultimate weapon. Gai-sensei's power is not derived from a special chakra nature, but from turning his own physical form into a perfected tool. Izuku stared at the page, his own notes providing the revelation he desperately needed. An unprepared vessel. An eggshell. He had been so focused on the power within the vessel, he had completely neglected the vessel itself. Standard academy training, a few laps, some basic katas, it was nothing. It was like trying to build a dam with popsicle sticks. He needed to rebuild himself from the ground up. He needed to forge his body into something that could withstand the storm raging inside him. A new fire lit in his eyes. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't just waiting for his arm to heal. He had 2 good legs, a good arm, and a core of steel. The graduation exam might be impossible, but his journey was just beginning. His new training regimen started the very next day, before the sun had even thought about rising. He snuck out of the orphanage, a towel around his neck, and ran. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed, his cast-bound arm an awkward, thumping weight at his side. He ran to the edge of the village, to the deserted training ground 7. It felt right to start here, in the place where his life had been irrevocably changed. The place was still scarred. The trench he had carved was a jagged wound in the earth. The shattered trees had been cleared away, but the stumps remained, silent monuments to his uncontrolled power. It was a perfect reminder of the stakes. His training was a patchwork creation, cobbled together from his obsessive analysis of others. He did one-arm push-ups until his left arm trembled with exhaustion. He did squats and lunges until his legs felt like jelly. He mimicked Rock Lee's balance training, finding a tall stump and standing on it on one leg for hours, his cast throwing his center of gravity completely off. The first few days, he fell every few minutes. By the end of the week, he could stand for an hour without wavering. He filled a spare backpack with rocks and wore it while he did pull-ups on a sturdy tree branch, his one good arm straining until the muscles screamed. He set up ropes and practiced dodging swinging logs, honing his reflexes and footwork. It was brutal, punishing, lonely work. Every sunrise found him covered in sweat, dirt, and bruises, but every sunset found him stronger than the day before. His motivation was the phantom throb in his right arm. It was a constant, nagging reminder of his failure, but also a promise of his potential. He would not break himself again. He would become unbreakable. But physical strength was only half the equation. The other half was knowledge. His afternoons were spent in the Konoha Public Library, a place he knew better than his own room. But he wasn't reading about famous battles or legendary jutsu anymore. He was in the medical section, a dusty, quiet corner usually reserved for aspiring medical nin. He devoured every scroll and book he could find on the human body. He studied anatomical charts, memorizing the names and functions of every muscle, bone, and organ. He pored over texts detailing the chakra circulatory system, tracing the intricate web of pathways and the 361 tenketsu, the chakra points. He read case studies of shinobi who had suffered from chakra overload. The symptoms were chillingly familiar: torn muscle tissue, cellular breakdown, nerve damage, shattered bones. It was all there, in dry, clinical text. His body wasn't breaking because One for All was inherently destructive. It was breaking because he was trying to force a raging river through a garden hose. The breakthrough came from a scroll on advanced healing jutsu. It detailed how a skilled medical nin could channel their chakra into a patient's body, flowing it gently and precisely through the damaged pathways to encourage cellular regeneration. It spoke of control, of distribution, of spreading the chakra evenly to avoid causing further harm. Spreading it evenly, the phrase echoed in his mind. He had been thinking of One for All as a cannonball, a single, focused point of immense power. That was how Toshinori had used it. That was how he had used it. But what if that was wrong? What if he was trying to emulate the master without understanding the fundamentals? What if, instead of a cannonball, he treated it like a cloak? What if, instead of channeling 100% of the power into a single limb, he tried to channel a tiny fraction of it, just 1%, and spread it evenly across his entire body at once? The idea was terrifying. His last attempt at channeling the power had cost him his arm. But the logic felt sound. It wouldn't be a flood overwhelming a single dam. It would be a gentle rise in the water level across the entire reservoir. The pressure would be distributed. Theoretically, his body should be able to handle it. That night, back at Training Ground 7, under the pale light of the moon, he decided to test his theory. His arm was still in a cast, but the rest of his body was stronger, tougher than it had ever been. He stood in the center of the clearing, his heart a frantic drum. He closed his eyes and reached inward. The power was there, a vast, sleeping ocean of energy. It felt warm, inviting, powerful. He could feel the echoes of the 8 souls within it, a silent, expectant audience. He remembered the feeling of the torrent, the overwhelming flood. He didn't reach for that. He focused, visualizing a single thimble. He imagined dipping that thimble into the ocean and pulling out a single, solitary drop, 1%. He held that tiny bead of immense power in his mind's eye. Then, using the anatomical charts he had memorized, he visualized his own chakra circulatory system. He pictured the power splitting, dividing into thousands of tiny threads, and flowing out from his core. He pushed the energy not to his fist, not to his leg, but everywhere. Down his arms, through his torso, into his legs, all the way to the tips of his fingers and toes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he felt it. It wasn't a violent explosion. It was a low, steady hum, like a tuning fork struck against the world. A faint, ethereal green aura, like heat haze, shimmered around his body. Red lightning, thin as spider silk, crackled across his skin, harmlessly tracing the lines of his muscles. The feeling was indescribable. He didn't feel like he was going to explode. He felt alive, more alive than he had ever been. The world sharpened. The chirping of the crickets became distinct, individual notes. The rustle of the leaves was a clear, crisp symphony. He felt a low-level thrum of strength in his every fiber. He wasn't a god, but he was no longer just human. He opened his eyes. He took a cautious step. His foot landed with a soft thump, and he found himself 2 feet further than he'd intended. He jumped, a simple hop, and soared a good 10 feet into the air, landing as softly as a cat. His cast-bound arm felt lighter, the burden lessened. He looked at his left hand. It was glowing faintly with the same green aura. He clenched it into a fist. He turned to a thick, sturdy oak tree that had survived his earlier rampage. He took a deep breath. Control. This is about control. He threw a simple, straight punch. Not a smash. Just a punch. His fist connected with the trunk with a solid crack. The bark splintered, and a fist-sized indentation appeared in the wood. A sharp, stinging pain radiated up his knuckles, the normal pain of punching something very, very hard. But that's all it was. No cracking bone. No tearing muscle. No catastrophic backlash. He stared at his knuckles, then at the damaged tree, and then back at his hand. A wide, incredulous, and utterly joyous grin split his face. Tears of relief welled in his eyes. It worked! he whispered to the silent woods. It worked! He had done it. He had found the key. He had forged the first link in the chain of control. He called it one for all, full cowl, a name that felt right, a name that signified wearing the power instead of just wielding it. It was his own unique application, born from his own mind. He wasn't just an inheritor. He was an innovator. The day of the genin graduation exam arrived. Izuku's cast had been removed the day before, his arm a pale, scarred, and disturbingly thin appendage. He still couldn't make a proper fist with it, but the doctors had cleared him for light activity. He stood with his classmates in the academy's main hall, awaiting the final test, a one-on-one taijutsu spar. Iruka-sensei stood before them, his expression grim. This is your final hurdle, Iruka announced. Show us you have the fundamentals. Show us you have the will. Your opponent will be one of your own classmates. Izuku's name was called. His opponent was a boy named Kenji, a confident, athletic student who was one of Kiba's cronies. As Izuku walked to the sparring circle, he could hear the whispers. It's Deku. What's he even doing here? He's been out for 2 months. Look at his arm. He's pathetic, Kiba just snickered. This'll be over in 5 seconds. Iruka looked at Izuku, and for a moment, Izuku saw that old, familiar pity in his eyes. Midoriya, are you sure you're fit for this? There's no shame in waiting for the next exam. I'm ready, sensei, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. He met Iruka's gaze, and for the first time, there was no fear in his own. Only resolve. Iruka hesitated, then nodded. Very well. Begin! Kenji lunged immediately, not wanting to waste time. He threw a quick combination, a jab and a cross, aimed at Izuku's face. In the past, Izuku would have flailed, tripped, or frozen, but now, the world was different. He didn't activate full cowl. Not yet. He simply moved, his body lighter, his reflexes sharper from months of brutal, focused training. He ducked under the jab and swayed back from the cross, the movements economical, if a little clumsy. Kenji was surprised by the dodge but pressed his attack, launching a series of kicks. Izuku backpedaled, blocking clumsily with his forearms, giving ground. To everyone watching, it looked like the same old story, the useless Deku, completely on the defensive, about to be overwhelmed. Just give up, Deku! Kenji taunted, seeing an opening. He feinted a punch and then dropped into a low sweep kick, a classic, effective maneuver designed to take an opponent off their feet. This was it. The moment Izuku had been waiting for. As the kick swept towards his ankles, Izuku's demeanor shifted. He took a deep breath, and a flicker of green energy, almost too faint to see in the bright lights of the hall, enveloped his body. One for all, full cowl, 1%. To Kenji it was as if Izuku simply vanished. One moment he was there, a perfect target, and the next he was gone. Izuku hadn't dodged. He had used the tiny boost in power to leap straight up, Kenji's legs sweeping harmlessly under him. Time seemed to slow for Izuku. He saw Kenji's momentary confusion, his body overcommitted to the sweep. He saw Iruka's eyes widen in shock. He saw Kiba's smirk vanish from his face. Izuku landed silently behind his opponent. Kenji, realizing his mistake, tried to spin around, his movements suddenly frantic. But Izuku was already there. He didn't use a smash. He didn't need to. He used the taijutsu he had practiced to exhaustion, now amplified by a whisper of his true power. He drove the sole of his foot into the back of Kenji's knee, buckling his leg. As Kenji stumbled forward, Izuku stepped to the side and delivered a sharp, open-palmed strike to the side of his neck. It was a perfectly executed stun, not a killing blow, but more than enough to disrupt the nervous system for a moment. Kenji's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence filled the hall. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds, and for 25 of them, Izuku had looked like he was losing. Iruka stared, his mouth slightly agape. He had seen Izuku's sudden burst of speed. He had seen the clean, precise, and surprisingly merciful takedown. This wasn't the clumsy, hesitant boy he had known for years. This was someone else. Someone with a core of hidden strength. Izuku stood over his fallen opponent, his breath coming in steady rhythm. The faint green aura faded. He looked at his hands. His right arm still ached, a reminder of his recklessness. His left hand, which had delivered the final blow, was perfectly fine. Failure and triumph. He needed both to move forward. He turned to face his teacher. Irika finally seemed to shake himself from his stupor. He walked into the circle, checked on Kenji, and then looked at Izuku, his eyes filled with a new, profound confusion and a flicker of something Izuku had never seen from him before: respect. "Midoriya, you pass." The words hit him with more force than any punch. He had done it. Against all odds, he had done it. Later, as he was handed the simple, polished metal plate of his Konoha forehead protector, he felt its cool weight in his palm. It was more than just a piece of metal. It was a promise. It was a beginning. He tied it around his forehead, the crisp fabric a stark contrast to his wild green hair. He looked at his reflection in the polished metal. He saw a boy with freckles and wide, determined eyes. He saw the faint scars on his right arm and the quiet strength in his left. He was no longer just a chakraless dreamer. He was no longer just Deku. He was Izuku Midoriya, genin of the Hidden Leaf. And he was the ninth wielder of One for All. His path was just beginning, and it would be paved with sweat, pain, and an unbreakable will to become the vessel he was meant to be. The first day of being a genin felt strangely anticlimactic. After the life-altering revelation of One for All, the grueling 2 months of secret training, and the heart-stopping tension of the graduation exam, Izuku had expected something more. A grand ceremony, perhaps. A solemn vow by the memorial stone. Instead, there was just a return to the same old academy classroom, sitting at the same worn wooden desk. The atmosphere, however, was completely different. The air buzzed with a nervous, excited energy. The students were no longer just students. They were shinobi, their foreheads adorned with the proud, gleaming symbol of the leaf. They chattered excitedly about which Jonin sensei they would get, who would be on their team, and what their first real mission would be. Izuku sat alone, as usual, but the solitude felt different today. It was less a cage of loneliness, and more a quiet space for observation. He clutched his notebook, its pages filled with his own secret language of power and anatomy. The metallic weight of his own forehead protector was a constant, reassuring pressure, a physical reminder that he belonged here. He had earned his place. He watched the other graduates. Naruto Uzumaki was, as always, the center of a vortex of noise and chaos, boasting loudly about how he would be assigned to the strongest Jonin and become Hokage by lunchtime. Sasuke Uchiha sat brooding by the window, a magnet for the adoring gazes of half the girls in the class, including a flustered Sakura Haruno who was trying to subtly edge Ino Yamanaka out of his line of sight. They were all so full of potential, so unaware of the secret war that had shaped their world. They were the people he was now sworn to protect, with a power they could never comprehend. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. Iruka-sensei entered the room, a stack of papers in his hand. The chatter died down instantly. "First of all, congratulations to all of you for graduating," Iruka began, a rare, wide smile on his face. "From today, you are full-fledged shinobi of Konohagakure. But your journey is only just beginning. You will now be assigned to 3-man squads, each led by a Jonin sensei. Your team will become your family, your comrades in arms. Trust them, rely on them, and protect them with your lives." His gaze swept across the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Izuku, a flicker of that new, uncertain respect in his eyes. He began to read out the team assignments. Team 7 Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno. Naruto cheered, while Sakura slumped in despair. And Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto's jaw dropped in horror, while Sakura shot up, ecstatic. Their sensei would be Kakashi Hatake. Izuku's pencil scratched furiously in his notebook. Kakashi-sensei? The copy ninja. S-rank potential. Sharingan wielder. Incredible synergy with Sasuke's own developing Sharingan. Naruto's raw power and Sakura's chakra control to balance them out. A high-potential, high-conflict team. Team 10, Ino Yamanaka, Shikamaru Nara, and Choji Akimichi. A groan from Shikamaru, an exasperated sigh from Choji, and a huff from Ino. The classic Ino Shikacho formation, a legacy passed down through generations. Their sensei, Asuma Sarutobi, the Hokage's own son. One by one, the teams were called. Finally, Iruka reached the last sheet of paper. "Team 8, he announced, and Izuku's breath caught in his throat. "Hinata Hyuga." Izuku glanced over at the Hyuga heiress. She was seated in the back corner, her posture straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She shrank under Iruka's gaze, her pale, lavender eyes wide with anxiety. Izuku's mind raced. Hyuga clan. Byakugan. Gentle fist taijutsu. Her bloodline focuses on precision, seeing chakra pathways, and subtle disruption. The absolute opposite of my own power. Shino Aburaim, the stoic, trench-coated boy adjusted his dark glasses, offering no visible reaction. His clan, the Aburaim, hosted colonies of Kikeichu insects within their bodies, using them as weapons and tools in exchange for their chakra. Aburaim. Logical, analytical, tactical, a living hive of sensory and offensive power. His clan values stealth and information gathering. Again, completely different from a frontal assault. Iruka paused, and Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. There was only one name left. His name, and Izuku Midoriya. A low murmur rippled through the classroom. Kiba snorted audibly. "Are you kidding me? They're saddling the Hyuga heiress and an Aburaim with Deku? What's he gonna do, analyze the enemy to death?" Izuku ignored him. He looked at his new teammates. Hinata wouldn't meet his eyes, her gaze fixed firmly on her desk, a faint blush dusting her cheeks. Shino turned his head slightly in Izuku's direction, his expression unreadable behind his high collar and dark shades. Izuku felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. A Hyuga, an Aburaim, and him, the chakraless brute force specialist with a secret that could get them all killed. It was a team of oil, water, and nitroglycerin. "Your Jonin instructor," Iruka finished. "Will be Kurinai Yuhi." Izuku's eyes widened. Kurinai Yuhi. Konoha's #1 genjutsu mistress. Her specialty is the most subtle and chakra-intensive of all the ninja arts. An illusionist. The pieces clicked together in his head with a dreadful, dawning clarity. This wasn't a random assignment. This was a deliberate choice by the third Hokage. He had placed Izuku, the boy with an unknown, cataclysmic physical power, on a team with a Hyuga who could see the chaotic energy inside him with her Byakugan. He had added an Aburaim, a master of logic and detached observation, to analyze his every move, and he had put them under the command of a genjutsu expert, a sensei whose primary skills were utterly useless for training or controlling him, forcing the entire team to be unorthodox from the very beginning. This wasn't a team. This was a containment unit. A science experiment. And he was the volatile element at its center. An hour later, Team 8 gathered in a designated classroom to await their new sensei. The silence was thick enough to cut with a kunai. Hinata sat rigidly in a chair, her gaze fixed on a knot in the wooden floor. Shino stood by the window, staring out at the village, perfectly still. Izuku sat at a desk, his notebook open, but his pencil was motionless. He was too nervous to even analyze. What was he supposed to say? "Hi, I'm Izuku. I have practically no chakra of my own, but I'm secretly the vessel for a godlike power that stockpiles the strength of 8 dead people, and if I use it wrong, my arms explode." "Nice to meet you." The door slid open, and a woman with striking red eyes and long, black, flowing hair entered. She wore the standard Jonin flak jacket over a red, bandage-like mesh armor. She was beautiful, poised, and radiated an aura of calm, confident power. This was Kurinai Yuhi. Her crimson eyes swept over her new charges. They lingered on Hinata with a touch of warmth, on Shino with professional acknowledgement, and on Izuku with a deep, penetrating curiosity. She had clearly been briefed. "Team 8, she said, her voice smooth and melodic. "I am Kurinai Yuhi, and I will be your sensei. Let's head to the roof." Introductions are in order. On the rooftop, with the afternoon sun warming the tiles and the wind gently rustling their hair, the awkwardness only intensified. The 4 of them sat in a small circle. The carved faces of the Hokages watched over them from the cliff face, silent stone judges. "All right," Kurinai began, leaning back on her hands. "Let's get to know each other. Tell me your name, your likes, your dislikes, and your dream for the future. I'll start. My name is Kurina Yuhi. I like evening walks and cultivating rare plants. I dislike pointless violence. My dream is to see my students grow into fine shinobi who will protect this village. She smiled. Simple. You with the glasses. You're next. Shino adjusted his shades. My name is Shino Abirame. I like studying entomology and discovering new insect species. I dislike people who swat at my kekkei. His voice was a flat, emotionless monotone. My dream is to perfect my clan's jutsu and become a shinobi whose logic and strategy are never questioned. Why? Because a sound strategy is the surest path to victory with minimal casualties. Logical. Efficient. He sees being a shinobi as a science, Izuku noted mentally. Alright. You next, Hinata. Hinata jumped as if startled. And me? She squeaked. She twisted a lock of her dark blue hair around her finger. My name is Hinata Hyuga. I like pressed flowers and Her gaze flickered almost imperceptibly towards where Naruto was probably causing trouble somewhere in the village. Cinnamon buns. Her voice grew even quieter. I dislike fighting and being the center of attention. My dream. She took a deep, shuddering breath. My dream is to become strong enough to change myself, to become a person who is not a disappointment to her clan, and who can stand proudly by the side of the people she admires. Her face was bright red by the time she finished, her gaze glued to her lap. She lacks confidence, but there's a core of intense determination in there, Izuku analyzed. She's not fighting for power, she's fighting for self-worth. I understand that. Kurenai's expression softened with sympathy before she turned to Izuku. And you? Our wildcard, 3 pairs of eyes, 2 visible, 1 hidden, turned to him. The full weight of their attention was a physical pressure. And my name is Izuku Midoriya, he began, his voice a little shaky. He clutched his notebook for support. I like analyzing jutsu and shinobi tactics, and I like Katsudan. I dislike bullies and people who use their strength to prey on the weak. He took a breath, the next part being the most important. This was his mission statement. This was the truth, even if it was wrapped in a necessary lie. My dream, he said, his voice gaining a surprising amount of strength as he looked up at the stone face of the 4th Hokage. My dream is to become a shinobi who can save everyone, a hero who, no matter how scary or hopeless a situation is, can make people feel safe just by being there. I want to become a pillar that this village can rely on. Silence. Kurenai stared at him, her red eyes wide with surprise. It was an incredibly bold, almost naive dream, but he had said it with such raw, unvarnished sincerity that it was impossible to mock. Hinata looked up at him, her own pale eyes filled with a new and profound curiosity. Even Shino seemed to tilt his head, a gesture of consideration. Kurenai recovered first, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across her face. A pillar, eh? That's a heavy burden to carry. Especially for a boy who, according to his files, has almost no chakra. The challenge was laid bare. Izuku met her gaze, unflinching. Chakra isn't everything, sensei. Indeed, Kurenai agreed. Which brings us to our final test. Meet me at Training Ground 8 tomorrow at sunrise. We're going to have a little test to see if you are truly ready to be genin. Oh, and I wouldn't eat breakfast. You'll probably just throw it up. She vanished in a swirl of crimson petals, leaving the 3 genin alone on the roof. The message was clear. This was their real graduation exam. And failure meant being sent back to the academy. The sun was just a pale pink smear on the horizon when Team 8 assembled at Training Ground 8. The air was cool and damp with morning dew. The training ground was a small, forested area with a stream running through it, and 3 wooden posts standing in a clearing. Kurenai was already there, leaning against one of the posts. In her hand she held 2 small, silver bells that tinkled faintly in the breeze. Izuku's eyes narrowed. The bell test. It was a classic, a legendary rite of passage for new genin teams. He had read about it in the archives. It was a test first implemented by the 3rd Hokage himself and famously used by jonin like Jiraiya and Minato. The goal wasn't just to get a bell. Good, you're on time, Kurenai said, her voice all business. The objective is simple. You have until noon to take one of these bells from me. She held them up. There are only 2 bells, which means, at least one of you will fail. The one who fails to get a bell will be tied to one of those posts, and will watch as the others eat lunch in front of them. Then, they will be sent back to the academy. Understood? 2 bells. 3 genin. The math was cruel and designed to shatter any fledgling sense of teamwork before it could even form. It was a test of individual skill, but also a psychological trap. Hinata's face paled. Shino adjusted his glasses. Izuku's mind was already racing, analyzing the setup, the objective, the hidden meaning. You are free to use any and all of your skills and tools, Kurenai continued, attaching the bells to her hip. Come at me with the intent to kill, or you will never succeed. Ready? She pulled out a small clock and placed it on top of a post. Begin! In a flash, Shino and Hinata vanished into the trees, their academy training kicking in. They knew better than to face a Jonin head-on. Izuku, however, hesitated for a second too long. And what's your plan, Pillar-kun? Kurenai asked, her red eyes fixed on him. Going to analyze me from a distance? Izuku knew a frontal assault was suicide, but he also knew he had to test the waters. He had to gather data. One for all, full cow! He whispered. The faint green aura shimmered into existence around him, the almost invisible red lightning crackling across his skin. He pushed it to 2%, a new limit he'd been carefully testing. The world sharpened. He charged. His speed was impressive for a genin. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, his movements a blur. He feinted high with his left hand, then dropped low, his right hand shooting out, aiming not for Kurenai herself, but for the bells at her hip. His recovering right arm protested with a dull ache, but it held. Kurenai didn't even move her feet. She simply tilted her body back, a graceful, fluid motion that caused Izuku's grasping hand to miss by a millimeter. As he shot past her, she stuck out a leg, tripping him. Izuku reacted instantly, tucking and rolling, using the momentum to spring back to his feet a safe distance away. He was panting slightly. The power usage was minimal, but the concentration it required was immense. Kurenai raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Fast. And good reflexes. But completely predictable. From the trees, a swarm of black insects erupted, converging on Kurenai from all sides. Shino's opening move. As the insects enveloped her, Hinata burst from another direction, her fingers extended. Gentle fist! Her pale, lavender eyes were activated, the veins around her temples bulging. The Byakugan was active. She aimed a precise strike at Kurenai's arm, intending to shut down the Tenketsu and paralyze it, but her fingers passed through Kurenai's arm as if it were smoke. The figure of Kurenai, along with the swarm of insects, dissolved into a cloud of crimson petals. A genjutsu. Of course, Izuku thought, gritting his teeth. She's a genjutsu master. We can't trust what we see. Behind you. Kurenai's voice whispered from right behind Hinata. Hinata gasped and spun around, but Kurenai was already there. She delivered a gentle but firm chop to the back of Hinata's neck, and the Hyuga heiress crumpled to the ground, unconscious. One down, Kurenai said calmly. From his hiding spot, Shino sent another, smaller swarm of Kekkei to investigate, but Kurenai was already gone again. The next few hours were a humiliating lesson in futility. Shino's insects were tricked by illusions. Izuku's speed was countered by Kurenai's flawless precognition and superior taijutsu. She never used a powerful jutsu. She simply outthought and outmaneuvered them at every turn, picking them apart with casual ease. She trapped Shino in a genjutsu, tree-binding death, causing him to waste precious time and chakra fighting an illusionary tree. She appeared before Izuku as a vision of the little girl he had saved, causing him to hesitate for a critical second before she swept his legs out from under him. She was toying with them. Humiliating them. And worse, she was forcing them to compete. Izuku and Shino found themselves accidentally interfering with each other's traps, each so focused on getting a bell for themselves that they failed to communicate. Noon was fast approaching. Hinata had recovered but was deeply demoralized. Shino was growing frustrated, his logical mind struggling to process an opponent who defied sensory data, and Izuku. Izuku was sitting behind a bush, his notebook open, his mind working furiously. He wasn't just thinking about Kurenai. He was thinking about his team, Hinata. Her Byakugan can see through genjutsu. She can see the flow of chakra. She should be our eyes, our way of telling what's real and what's an illusion. But she's too timid. She doesn't have the confidence to take charge and direct us. Shino. His insects are the perfect distraction and sensory tool. They can spread out, track Kurenai's real position, and attack from multiple angles at once. But he's too independent. He relies on his own logic and doesn't trust the input of others easily. Me. My full cowl gives me the speed and power to be the striking force. I'm the only one who can physically match a Jonin's speed, even for a moment. But I'm reckless. I charge in without thinking, and my power is a sledgehammer when we need a scalpel. He looked at the 2 bells glittering on Kurenai's hip. 2 bells. 3 genin. The test wasn't about who was strong enough to get a bell. It was about what would they do when faced with the certainty that one of them would fail. Would they sacrifice each other for their own success? The answer hit him with the force of a revelation. They had all been thinking about it wrong. The purpose of a 3-man cell isn't to have 3 strong individuals. It's to have one strong team. Irika's words came back to him. Your team will become your family. Trust them, rely on them, protect them. The test wasn't about getting the bells. The test was about teamwork. It was about being willing to fail together rather than succeed alone. He snapped his notebook shut. He had a plan. A stupid, reckless, probably not going to work plan. But it was better than anything they were doing now. He found Shino first, who was methodically laying an insect-based trap near the stream. Shino-kun, Izuku said, startling him. Midoriya. Your approach is inefficient. You should conceal your sound. Shino stated flatly. Forget that. Your plan won't work, Izuku said, his voice firm. None of our plans will work. Not alone. Shino turned to face him, his head tilted. Elaborate. This test isn't about us getting the bells. It's about us working together to get the bells, Izuku explained quickly. Kurenai-sensei is trying to make us compete. She wants to see if we'll abandon each other. The only way to pass is to prove her wrong. Shino was silent for a moment, processing this. Your logic is plausible. The failure rate for this test is historically high, often attributed to a lack of cooperation. What is your proposed strategy? Izuku then found Hinata, who was hiding poorly behind a tree, on the verge of tears. Hinata-san, he said gently. She jumped, letting out a small squeak. Midoriya-kun. I'm sorry, I'm not being any help. That's not true, Izuku said, his voice full of a confidence he didn't quite feel. You're the most important part of this team, Hinata-san. We need you. We need your eyes. He laid out the plan. It was simple in concept, but horrendously difficult in execution. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and each of them performing their role flawlessly. It required them to stop being 3 genin and start being Team 8. Hinata stared at him, her pale eyes wide. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with expectation. He was relying on her. Shino nodded slowly after Izuku finished. The probability of success is low. However, it is higher than our current probability, which is 0. I will cooperate. Hinata took a deep breath, her small fists clenching. I will do my best. 10 minutes to noon. Kurenai was standing in the clearing, looking at the clock on the post. She sighed. It looked like another failed team. They hadn't figured it out. A shame. The boy had fire, the Hyuga had potential, and the Aburame was intelligent. But they couldn't work together. Suddenly, a massive cloud of Kekkei insects burst from the tree line from 3 different directions, converging on her. It was a bigger swarm than before, a true distraction. Kurenai smiled faintly. A desperate final attack. She prepared to use a genjutsu to disperse them, but then something changed. Byakugan! From a high branch, Hinata's voice rang out, clearer and more confident than before. Her eyes were active, scanning the battlefield. Sensei is creating a chakra diversion to her left. The insects are following a fake image. The real one is 10 meters to your right, Shino-kun. Shino, hidden near the stream, didn't hesitate. He redirected the bulk of his swarm with a single hand sign, sending them hurtling towards Kurenai's true position. Kurenai clicked her tongue in annoyance. The girl could see through her illusions. Clever. But it was still just a swarm of bugs. She performed a quick substitution jutsu, replacing herself with a log as the insects swarmed over it. She reappeared on another branch, watching them. She's in the large oak tree to the east. Hinata called out, her voice acting as a beacon for the team. She's preparing a genjutsu. Kurenai's eyes widened slightly. The girl wasn't just seeing through the illusions. She was reading her chakra flow, predicting her moves. The Hyuga's eyes were truly magnificent, but it still wasn't enough. All three of them were out in the open now, their positions revealed. Kurenai prepared to end the test, to take them all down, and that's when Izuku made his move. He wasn't where Kurenai expected him to be. He was below her. One for all, full cowl, 3%. He pushed his limit, just a fraction. A surge of power, greater than anything he'd used before, flooded his body. The green aura around him brightened, the red lightning crackling audibly. He didn't charge at her. He slammed his foot into the trunk of the massive oak tree she was standing on. Smash! The impact wasn't a destructive blast. It was a focused shockwave. The entire tree, a behemoth that had stood for a century, shuddered violently from the blow. The trunk groaned and splintered. Kurenai, her balance completely shattered by the unexpected tremor, was thrown off the branch. She was a jonin. She twisted in midair, preparing to land gracefully. But the team wasn't done. Now, Shino-kun! Hinata yelled. Shino was waiting. He had laid a trap not for Kurenai, but for the ground beneath her. As she landed, his hidden Kikeichu insects surged from the earth, not to attack her, but to cling to her feet and legs, their collective weight and sticky chakra designed to slow her down for just a single, crucial second. It worked. For the first time in the entire test, Kurenai was immobilized. And Izuku was already there. He hadn't stopped after his kick. He had used the power in his legs to launch himself off the trembling tree, a green missile arcing through the air. He wasn't aiming for Kurenai. He wasn't even trying to fight her. His eyes were locked on the two silver bells at her hip. He flew past her, his hand darting out with speed that even she had trouble tracking. His fingers brushed against the cool metal. The noon alarm on the clock began to ring. Izuku landed in a crouch 20 feet away, panting, the 3% full cowl fading. In his hand, held high for all to see, were two small silver bells. Silence descended upon the clearing, broken only by the incessant ringing of the alarm and the buzzing of Shino's insects. Kurenai stood perfectly still, her feet still covered in bugs. She looked at her empty hip, then at Izuku, then at Hinata in the tree and Shino by the stream. A slow, genuine, and deeply impressed smile spread across her face. Well now, she said, her voice filled with amusement. I stand corrected. Later, Izuku and Shino sat side by side, eating the bento boxes Kurenai had provided. Tied securely to the middle post, her stomach rumbling loudly, was Hinata. You all pass, Kurenai announced, leaning against a tree. Hinata looked up shocked. But I didn't get a bell. I'm tied to the post, Izuku, Kurenai said, turning to him. Why do you think you passed? Izuku swallowed a mouthful of rice. Because we prioritized the success of the team over our individual success. The objective was to get the bells, but the goal was to prove we could work as a unit, even if it meant one of us failed the objective. Kurenai nodded, pleased. Exactly. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are scum. That's true. But those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. She smiled at the three of them. You all understood that. You combined your strengths, Hinata's eyes, Shino's tactics, and Izuku's unorthodox power. You created a strategy that none of you could have executed alone. She looked at Hinata, who was still tied up. You're tied to the post as a penalty for being taken out so easily at the start. A lesson to always be on your guard. But you redeemed yourself. You were the linchpin of their plan. Hinata's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of happiness. Kurenai then looked at Izuku, who was holding one of the bento boxes. He broke off a piece of rice and held it out to Hinata. "Here," he said with a smile. "You must be hungry, Midoriya. I told you not to feed her," Kurenai admonished, though there was no heat in her voice. "But we're a team," Izuku said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "If one of us is hungry, we all share." Shino, without a word, also offered a piece of his lunch to Hinata. Kurenai watched them, her heart swelling with a strange pride. The Hokage had given her a difficult hand, a genjutsu master with a team composed of a girl who couldn't see illusions, a boy who thought in pure logic, and a physical powerhouse who defied all ninja convention. An impossible team. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't impossible. Maybe they were exactly what the village needed. "Teammate," Kurenai announced, a real fire in her eyes now. "Your first official mission starts tomorrow. Be ready." As Izuku looked at his new teammates, a blushing Hinata awkwardly accepting his food, and a stoic Shino whose insects buzzed with what might have been approval, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with One for All. He had found his place. He was the wild card, the volatile element, the boy with the impossible power. But he wasn't alone anymore. He was part of a team.